Right now, hundreds of millions of light-years from where you are sitting, there is a hole in the universe so large that if you stood at its center and looked out in every direction, you would see almost nothing. Not the darkness of a moonless night. A different kind of empty, a sphere of space wide enough to hold thousands of galaxies, carrying only a scattered handful. In 1981, an astronomer named Robert Kirshner sat with a stack of fresh data and a number that refused to make sense. He was mapping galaxies in a narrow slice of sky toward the constellation Boötes, the herdsman, and the count kept coming back wrong. Not too high. Not too low. Missing. Where his survey expected to find the normal crowd of galaxies stacked out toward the horizon of the cosmos, there was a gap, a long, silent stretch with almost nothing in it at all. His first instinct was the instinct any careful scientist has. Something is wrong with the measurement, not the universe. But here is what should reach you, personally, before we go any further. Every atom of iron in your blood, every trace of carbon in the cells reading these words, was forged inside stars, inside galaxies, and scattered out when those stars died. The thing Kirshner had stumbled into was a region where that story, the story that built you, had barely happened at all. A piece of the universe where the machinery that makes matter, and eventually makes minds, had almost nothing to work with. And the deepest question it raised was not why is it empty? It was this: if a thinking creature were born at the center of that emptiness, would it ever even know the rest of the universe was there? This is the Boötes void. And 4 decades later, we still cannot fully explain it. To feel why it shocked everyone, you first have to know what normal looks like. By 1981, astronomers had a rough sense of how galaxies are spread out. Not perfectly even, but reliably present. Wherever you pointed a deep enough telescope, galaxies appeared, near and far, like streetlights stretching off into the distance. Kirshner, working with August Oehmler, Paul Schechter, and Stephen Scheckman, was using a technique called a redshift survey. The idea is simple and beautiful. The farther a galaxy is, the faster the expanding universe carries it away, and the more its light is stretched toward the red. Measure that stretch, and you measure distance. So they were building a three-dimensional map, not just where galaxies sit on the sky, but how far back into space each one stands. And in the direction of Boötes, the map developed a wound. Galaxy after galaxy lined up at the near distances. Then a vast stretch of nothing. Then galaxies again, far on the other side. The empty span, once they pieced it together, was roughly 330 million light-years across. Here is the only honest way to picture that number. Light is the fastest thing there is. A beam of it crosses from the Earth to the Moon in about a second. To cross this void, that same beam needs 330 million years. It would have set out when the first dinosaurs were appearing, and it would still be traveling now, still inside the emptiness, with no galaxy to land on. In a sphere that size, at the universe's normal density, there should be something on the order of 2,000 galaxies. Kirshner's team found almost none. Later, deeper surveys raised the count to around 60. 60, where there should be 2,000. Imagine a map of a country, every city in its place, and then 97 out of every 100 of them simply gone, the lights switched off, the people never born. What was confirmed was the gap. It was real, it was measured, and it was enormous. What was unknown, completely unknown, was how a region that large had been swept so nearly clean. If a hole in the universe that big is the strangest thing you have heard today, I should warn you, there is one of these waiting every week on Voyager Cosmos. Subscribe, and we will keep walking out to the edges together. Now, back to the gap, and the long line of explanations that each looked right, and each fell apart. The first explanation was the calmest one. A mistake. Maybe the survey had simply missed galaxies. Early redshift work was slow and painstaking. You measured galaxies one at a time, and it was easy to imagine the sample was too thin to trust. For a while, that was the comfortable answer. The void wasn't a hole in the cosmos, it was a hole in the data. So astronomers went back and looked harder, with better instruments and wider nets. And the void did not fill in. The deeper they looked, the more they confirmed the absence. The few dozen galaxies that turned up only sharpened the strangeness. There were just enough to prove the region wasn't unobservable, and far too few to make it normal. The detection survived every check. The explanation did not. But that was only the first idea to fall, and the next one was stranger. If the galaxies weren't missing from the data, perhaps they weren't missing at all. Perhaps they were hiding. This was a serious thought. The universe does conceal galaxies behind dust, or in forms so dim they barely register. Astronomers call them low-surface brightness galaxies, faint smears of stars that early surveys could easily overlook. Maybe the Boötes void was full of dark, quiet galaxies that simply hadn't switched on brightly enough to be seen. It was a hopeful idea. It would have meant the void was an illusion, a trick of faint light, and the universe was as evenly furnished as everyone had assumed. But as detectors improved through the 1980s and 1990s, the hidden population never appeared in anything like the numbers needed. The void wasn't crowded with shy galaxies. It was genuinely, measurably underbuilt. What was confirmed was that the emptiness was physical, not a failure of eyesight. What remained unknown was why physics would carve out a bubble that big in the first place. And into that question walked an idea that didn't shrink the void, it made it ordinary, and somehow that was the most unsettling turn of all. Through the 1980s, astronomers were learning that the universe is not a smooth scatter of galaxies at all. In 1986, mapping the sky in their own redshift survey, Margaret Geller and John Hucker revealed something that changed cosmology. Galaxies are strung along immense walls and threads, with great empty bubbles between them. The structure has a name now, the cosmic web. Galaxies trace bright filaments, like water clinging to the edges of soap bubbles, and the inside of each bubble is a void. Here is a way to hold that in your head. Picture a sink full of dish foam. The soap gathers in thin films along the surfaces of the bubbles, and the air sits trapped in the hollow metals. The universe is built the same way: matter on the films, emptiness in the bubbles, and we live on one of the films. Suddenly the Boötes void wasn't a freak. It was a bubble. The biggest, emptiest bubble anyone had found, but a bubble all the same, exactly the kind of thing the cosmic web predicts. That should have been the end of the mystery. A natural feature of large-scale structure, explained. Except the Boötes void was too good at being empty. Most voids are underdense, they have fewer galaxies than average, but they aren't deserts. The Boötes void is an extreme even among voids, one of the most pronounced low-density regions of its size we have ever charted. What was confirmed was that voids are normal and expected. What was unknown was why this particular one sat so far out at the edge of what the models comfortably produce. And then the few galaxies inside it spoke up, and what they revealed was the strangest clue yet. Those 60-odd galaxies are not sprinkled at random through the void. When astronomers plotted them, they noticed the galaxies tend to fall along a rough tube, a faint chain running through the heart of the emptiness, like a single thread left behind in a hollowed-out room. That arrangement is a fingerprint. And it points to a real, leading hypothesis for how the Boötes void came to be. The idea is that the Boötes void was never one void. It was several smaller voids, sitting side by side in the early universe, that slowly merged into one enormous chamber as the cosmos expanded and matter drained away from the empty regions toward the dense ones. The tube of galaxies would be a remnant, the leftover wall, the seam where 2 or 3 smaller bubbles once met before they fused into the single great nothing we see today. It is an elegant explanation. It takes the impossible scale of the void and builds it from ordinary pieces, the way a river delta is built from countless small streams joining. But notice what it does and does not do. It explains the shape. It explains the seam. What it has never fully explained is the timing and the totality, how the emptying went so far, so completely, leaving a region this large, this close to barren. The merger hypothesis is our best current map of how it formed. It is not yet a closed case. And the part of this story that no equation has ever resolved is the part that has nothing to do with how the void was made, and everything to do with what it would be like to live inside one. So let it land, fully, for one moment. Imagine a civilization born on a world near the center of the Boötes void, beings who look up, as we do, and try to map their universe. They would see their own galaxy's stars, brilliant and close. And then, when they turned their telescopes outward, hoping for neighbors, they would find a sky almost perfectly bare. No nearby galaxies. No glittering crowd to the horizon. Just an enormous, patient dark. Think of a lighthouse keeper on an island wrapped in permanent fog, who has never once glimpsed another light, and so grows up believing the lighthouse is the only one in the world. That is not a metaphor for them. That is their actual sky. The astronomer Greg Aldering put the same thought another way, and it is one of the most quietly staggering lines in modern astronomy. If the Milky Way had formed in the center of the Boötes void, we would not have known other galaxies existed until well into the 20th century. Sit with that. Our entire understanding that the universe is vast and full of other galaxies, a discovery we treat as obvious, depended on being born somewhere we could see them. A few 100 million light-years to one side, and our whole picture of reality would have been a single galaxy, alone in an apparent nothing. This is the part that is not speculation, and not even really astronomy. It is fact, turned toward us. The Boötes void tells us that the view from any one place in the cosmos is not neutral. It is shaped by the accident of where you stand. Some minds, somewhere, are looking out at a universe that lies to them, that hides its own abundance behind an honest, empty sky. We are not those minds. We were born on a bright filament, surrounded by galaxies, handed a sky generous enough to teach us the truth about itself. That is not a small piece of luck.